the technology was not fully in place. Did you hear my introduction? Thank you. I also wish to emphasize that we are in a field of science where Denmark lags behind a number of countries at comparable scientific level. The topic is mobilization of research resources for the future technological development and focus on academic industrial interaction, topic which I've been interested in for a large number of years. Let us take a look at the Danish research landscape. Research is very often debated in the country. It also often results in deadlock as a result of polarization between the concepts, basic, pure research and applied research. A vast majority of research projects do, however, cover objectives between these extremes. But basic aspect we have to consider. We have limited resources and capacity in this country, so we have to prioritize. We have a legitimate expectation that the society benefits from research investment, and this, I think, becomes more and more pertinent in the future. The research landscape will primarily, in my view, be determined by research projects initiated by creative and far-sighted scientists capable of establishing interdisciplinary research groups and centers. And also, we have to admit, research programs outlined politically, but structured in the academic and industrial scientific environments. Here, we have a major challenge to scientific academic leaders. I'll come back to this critical issue in a moment. Let's have a look at projects and programs, and not least with the concept research freedom. Research freedom and level of scientific independence are parameters to be handled professionally at university. Again, a major challenge to academic leaders. If we take the scientific training, PhD have been trained under supervision, and after 1 to 2 years postdoc period, the development of junior scientists is normally completed. The acquired scientific skills now allow junior scientists to carry out independent but integrated research within frames of research programs. Some scientists possess or develop a capacity for novel and cross-frontier research coupled with the courage to initiate integrated programs. This requires courage. These scientists deserve full research freedom and resources sufficient to establish research groups or centers. This means that full research freedom is not a condition automatically available to scientists, but rather a trusted position which particularly skilled and dynamic scientists deserve. Let's take the relationship between research, innovation, and inventions. Danish research generally has a strong placing in international research landscape. That has been documented over and over again. And these aspects are prerequisites for access to the international research frontline and for the development of competitive research strategies. However, this is a necessary, but certainly not sufficient condition for the designation successful nation in the international natural science research community. Thus, in terms of transformation of basic scientific results into innovative industrial inventions, Denmark lags behind. That has been documented over and over again. In order to broaden the scope and deepen the focus of this process, profound and continuous educational initiatives should be launched. There must be a continued and increased focus on education. Let's take a brief look at the educational initiative. We have to critically, over and over again, analyze the student syllabus, perhaps with primary focus on the first year's program. As it stands now, the first year of study program are often dominated by heavy lecture and laboratory courses. And that, for many students, young students, are killers. Teaching programs aimed at stimulating the student's professional identity should be combined with courses describing other areas of natural sciences and the fascinating borderlines between disciplines. This is where the progress will be made in the future. The history and stories about the key inventions should be mandatory elements in the university teaching programs. Academia-society interactions. Companies. The primary goal of the industry is to create and produce products of value for the society. This is generally accepted. But in addition, companies increasingly have obligations of a broader scope formulated as corporate social responsibility. Only a few years ago, this was considered by many companies as a tiresome additional burden. Today, this is now incorporated in the strategic thinking of all companies. If we look at the science world, the primary goal of scientists is to provide new knowledge and to elucidate new connections in complex phenomena and structures. The society obligations might be described analogously as scientific social responsibility and could be formulated as a code of practice. I think this latter statement is at an early stage, but will be growing, in my view, in the future. We published it. This was the concept was coined just a few years ago, and we published this last year in the publication mentioned here. And I want to mention here that the Lundbeck Foundation, which is one of the major grantors of research funding, has introduced scientific social responsibility, abbreviated SSR, as an element in its research funding policy. So it is coming, and it will be spreading in the future, I'm sure. If we look at the university-industry interplay, a precondition for effective and fruitful non-university interplay is mutual confidence and respect. Simple words, mutual confidence and respect between the parties concerned. It is of fundamental importance if we want to make progress. The quality of research activities at universities is basically, of course, and it should be so, determined by scientists' talents, competencies, visions, and again, courage to enter novel research areas. Development activities should generally not be carried out at universities. And this applies to all branches of research, though following different models. It also comprises disciplines like humanities and other branches, but the patterns, of course, have to be different. Let's take an example. A university scientist makes an important discovery. It does happen from time to time. The potential use value is discussed confidentially with an industrial or another non-university partner. An estimated use value is secured through patenting and formulation of a contract. Subsequently, the discovery is published as soon as possible, taking both parties' interest into consideration. The further development should be placed in the hands of an external partner. There may be exceptions, but that should be the general pattern. And the university scientist continues the investigation of the basic scientific aspects of the project at the university laboratories, but should keep close confidential scientific contact with the external partner. Again, the word confidential, trust comes up over and over again. Let's take a closer look at academic industrial patenting. This is an area which is growing pretty wild at the moment. Let's try to boil that back to essentials, and I've tried to illustrate this on the next couple of slides. There should be a running dialogue between academia and industry to clarify industry interest and patentability of potential inventions. This requires a current contact at a confidential basis. Collaboration should be based on mutual trust. Again, one of these simple words which is so incredibly important and unfortunately relatively rare. Very few patents result in marketed products. That has to be realized by both parties. Payment, milestone, down payment, and royalties must be based on realistic timelines and understanding of industry's investment versus academia contribution. Again, we have to be realistic. If academia has a standard collaboration, and some have, and more should perhaps have it, a standard collaboration agreement, it should be open for negotiation in order to fit the specific collaboration in its best way. Joint invention, where both academia and industry should have rights, are common in PhD projects already. Again, a few words on patenting. And collaboration should start as early as possible, preferably before the first filing, or at least within the priority year. The limits of the invention should be very clear, for example, in chemistry. Which compounds are outside and which compounds are inside the patenting. Clear mutual understanding of what the claims cover. And clear agreement with regard to publication, including talks and posters. In case of material transfer between the parties, MTAs should be always signed. And a clear agreement on the prosecution of patent, industry prefers to take care of this with relevant assistance of inventors. And clear agreement on payment with regard to expenses in relation to prosecution, filing, translation, and very often also litigation. Clarity, and mutual trust and confidence. I want to say a few words about GTS institutes, which is an important asset in Danish universities. GTS means Godkendt Teknologisk Service, Advanced Technological Group. There is one goal: accelerate innovation in Danish companies through applied research. There are 9 not-for-profit such institutes covering different markets and technologies. 20,000 company customers every year, defining the research priorities. I would focus a little bit on Bioneer. This is the GTS institute I know best. This is within biomedicine and medical technology. It is owned entirely by DTU, with university partnering as a key strategy. Access to new competencies and know-how in order to offer new services to Danish companies. Access to specialized facilities, equipment for basis of new services, and joint development of commercialization in new intellectual properties, and commercial maturation of university inventions. I think that in the future, triangle collaboration patents rather than bilateral agreements between universities and companies would be very helpful. And I've illustrated here in a simple fashion how such a triangle collaboration structure could be established. We have the university with basic research, we have the GTS with applied research, and then industry value creation. And this triangle would be able to mobilize public investment in science. And again, I think triangles would normally be more operational and more facilitated by bilateral structures. Now, if we look at the complementary competencies, I have illustrated that's also using the triangle structure, just to emphasize it. Universities, strong in basic research, relatively weak in applied research, and very weak in development. It is the opposite to GTS Institute. Strong in development, relatively weak in basic research, although much basic research are carried out at the GTS Institute. And finally, again, just to illustrate the interaction, the complementary competencies on the basis of creating synergy through alliances, universities, the GTS Institute in the middle, and we have the companies to the right. So this interaction would seem to be very creative and very facilitated. Just a few words about leadership. Again, simple word, typical dinner conversation topic easy to talk about, difficult to establish. But we have to state that a prerequisite for success of the new university law is not terribly new anymore, but it was introduced a few years ago, is the accessibility of competent academic and research leadership. Academic rector, dean, head of department, research group, center, and program leaders. Leadership experience from industry is only to a limited extent useful in the academic world. Of course, there are overlap between these two leadership challenges, but the overlap is limited. General precondition for effective and sustainable leadership is documentation of scientific competencies at the international level. This is a prerequisite for the power to be a leader in the academic world. Leaders must have a capacity to make decisions in academic environments generally characterized by high levels of self-centeredness and competition. There's already focus on these aspects of vital importance for the academic scientific environment, but the area needs strong attention. And many resources from the over-dimensioned and to a large extent immaterial university bureaucratic machinery should be redirected, for example, towards leadership initiatives. I think also in the patenting area, the bureaucratic systems is overwhelming and could be reduced dramatically if we take a simpler, straightforward view. Again, on leadership, competencies, the head of department and center leaders. Again, capacity to formulate superior scientific goals. Ability to formulate visionary ideas, to create enthusiasm, which is a real driving force in any scientific environment. Within the frames of research group or centers, which should be sufficiently broad and flexible to be attractive for different groups of scientists. Frames for science should be broad so that even odd scientific competencies should be incorporated so that they can interact with the other types of scientists. Awareness of the pronounced dynamics of scientific structures with respect to immediate goals, technologies, and participating scientists. Stimulation of collaborative efforts to reach the research goals and at the same time allowing each scientist to achieve a desired level of individual scientific performance and development. Is this a paradoxical statement? It is not. It is really possible both to try to reach the own personal priorities and also to work with other scientists in an integrated manner. The final slide is a term that I coined a few years ago, scientific drowning, a challenge to scientific leaders. There is an exponentially growing amount of scientific information and data, and that would immediately seem to be positive for the scientific process. It also is with some limitation. Nevertheless, in spite of this, for example, the research-intensive pharma industry has experienced a declining flow of novel drugs in recent years. This is paradoxical. To some extent, this paradoxical development may reflect that scientists are drowned in the hectic flow of information, and similar mechanisms also play roles in the academic world. A critical step in building up research projects is a transition from the analytical phase and to the experimental approach. And there, scientific drowning is an issue of very critical importance. Here, research leaders have a very important role to play in assisting a junior scientist at this risky step, taking into account that decisions always have to be taken on an incompletely analyzed basis. But here, scientific leaders would be of incredibly great importance. Finally, I have had many discussions with my colleagues Flemming Biesenbacher, now chairman of the Carlsberg Foundation, Paul Andersen, CEO at Bioneer AS, Klaus Bøsø, senior vice president at H. Lundbeck AS. Thank you very much indeed.
Please remain at where you are right now, because there may be some comments or questions. You have a very nice way of presenting fairly provocative statements in a very nice, sort of smooth way. It's actually much more mind-stirring what you've said than I anticipated, and I anticipated a good deal. Anyway, who would be the first to either challenge or congratulate Paul on his talk? Yes, please.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I agree completely with your notion that trust building is essential to have any sort of way forward in terms of innovation. What do we need to enable that trust building to take place? It's not magic. It requires work. How do we make that work?
You know, the mechanisms in trust building, this is what you are asking for?
How do we, what institutional, what support structure do we need to make that happen?
I'm not sure we need additional structures. I think we need additional training of young scientists so they get these basic elements into their scientific training. That the importance is the simple things, to have trust, to be honest, to have a clear expression of your preferences, and also in relation to the people you are collaborating with. So you don't need anything else in terms of structures. Maybe you need fewer structures, but you need training of the young scientists, and then at the same time competent and far-sighted scientific leaders. So that may require a structure to somehow structure academic leadership. This remains to be demonstrated, but these two aspects are of key importance, in my view.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the interaction between industry and academia, and most of your presentation focuses on what we could call the ability of university and researchers to push their knowledge into the industry. Could you elaborate a little bit on the pull side, the pull capacity in the industry? You mentioned that there should be a scientific social responsibility, but do you have good concrete recommendations for the industry to follow?
Well, I think the social responsibility is a built-in concept in the industry through the corporate social responsibility. So I think the challenge is lying on in the university side, which are not used to think in terms of the social responsibility. Of course, it is a push-pull system. The universities have to offer something. The industries also have something to offer and to be open to the university people. And of course, openness and the expression of your clear views, and again to live up to the simple concepts of confidence and to maintain the agreements that you have been establishing. It is not, I am talking on basis of experience. I've been working with this for more than 40 years, especially in the academic world. And I think the basic elements perhaps are there, but they have to come to full bloom, again, with full appreciation of you have a push-pull system between universities and companies.
Please.
Mike Nelson with Georgetown University. I particularly liked your slide on scientific drowning, because that's what I do every day. I work on internet studies, and everything's changing so fast. I just can't keep track of all the different developments in my field. And part of the problem, I think, is the reward system that we have for researchers. Universities don't reward researchers for writing one quality article a year. They reward them for writing 10 mediocre articles. So I'm curious if you have any suggestions on how we can change the reward structure, how we can incent people to provide higher quality work that everybody should read, rather than just churning out paper after paper that no one has time to read.
I fully agree. Fully appreciate your comment and your question, and you are very right. I think the process is ongoing. I think there's an increasing focus on the quality papers and some sort of neglection of the, so to say, fill up papers. But also we can come back to the term scientific drowning. Today, if a young scientist is moving into a new area, you sit in front of your computer, you press a few buttons, you put in a few keywords into your computer, and you get 50, 100, 200 references flowing out of the computer. I'm afraid if you are not guided in this process, you will be drowned and your enthusiasm at the beginning will be killed. And you should also keep in mind, when you get these 100, 200 references, we see that floating out of that computer. I estimate, based on my personal experience, between 15–25% of these references are more or less incorrect. Some of them are wrong. So how do we handle this? Well, I did my basic research in the Middle Age. Went to the library, digged into the books, and took inspiration from what I was reading. It is not so easy to do today because the amount of data is so overwhelming. But I think the academic leader and mentor who has pushed his own ego back and is willing openly to discuss with a young scientist, they can help each other to come through this and allow the intuition and the competencies to be decisive factors in the decision of your project. A young scientist would normally be helpless in this situation. I can't get further to your question, but I think the drowning process can be killing.
Well, if I might put myself in as a commenter and a questionnaire right now, I think what you described right now is actually, in a nutshell, what leadership is. Leadership is not administration. It's like using this intuition and helping younger people. Yeah. If more people in industry and certainly also in the university world would have a more proper understanding what leadership is, that would help an awful lot. So I thought actually you gave a very good answer there. What I'm more concerned about is your stressing of trust. Whenever you get into trust, it's such a nice concept. Who could be against trust? There is a wonderful Paul Newman movie where he plays a character of a senator, I'm sure a fictitious senator in the United States, about 60 years old. And that man in his, about 60 years old, is very interested in young ladies for reasons that I cannot understand, of course. Anyway, he usually tells these young ladies that they should show trust. And what happens sort of indicates very clearly that that's what they should not have done. And to some extent, that story repeats itself in the scientific community, where not the bureaucracy of the universities, but the bureaucracies of these huge industrial organizations can completely overwhelm particularly young researchers. And they'll come in with a standard contract and say, well, you must show us trust. We are this well-known company, and we have existed for so many years, and our shareholders like us an awful lot, and this, that, and the other, so sign there. And younger researchers might be able to show trust, and like these young ladies, find afterwards that they are in a condition that they might not want to be in. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Well, I must say I fully agree with your comment. And of course, the trust, there's a tendency also in science, maybe particularly in science, I don't know, to play roles. Try to play roles in order to cover where your real intentions are. Roles will be disclosed sooner or later. But if young scientists are faced with this, person which are dependent on, it can be critically devastating. So I think there should be part of the interaction between the mentor and the young scientist. You must be able to look through the role players and through the surfaces and see where are the real substance in this particular person, in this particular situation. There's no easy way. There are also sociopaths everywhere. maybe not least in science. And it is very, very difficult to identify these people. And you have not identified them perhaps before you have one of your feet in the lock. So it's a major challenge, but without responsible scientific leaders, competent leaders, you are very often lost. So thank you for your comment, Lars. I fully
thank you.
agree.
And you say essentially that the answer is leadership
Yeah.
from more senior people.
Yeah.
More comments, questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned the apparent paradox that we do very well in our scientific positioning in the world, generally through our scientific achievements, but then you also indicated at least that we are not sufficiently good at transforming that knowledge into innovations. And in one of your slides, you had a list of steps that could be taken. I think you started out by saying a scientist makes an important discovery, and then you outlined the steps. But where do you actually see the bottleneck is? What is it we should do to become better at transforming all the good science into technological advancements?
I don't think there is a golden thing to do in this regard. There are many things that should be done. And I think the problem, as I see it, we don't have we do have it now perhaps beginning, a real research debate. But the polarization between the fundamental views in science and the applied science, this is a killer of the fruitful debates. How do we improve it? I think it is a question of attitude. Again, a question of training of young scientists during the educational process, that they should be aware of the sort of the fantastic events that have been described with the inventions, the basic inventions. People can see that if they really want, without disturbing their own career possibilities, if they can get it fueled into the society, this will be not only good for them, but it will be very, very rewarding. So I think much of this is in the educational process. But again, there's no easy, very clear-cut steps you can make from day one.
I think we had a last question, comment.
It is in a way a question, but it's more a comment. If we look at the process of converting knowledge into, let's say, product, it is my experience by trying that for really many years. It is definitely not a linear process. It is more a stochastic process. It is not a process you can sit down and create, and if you are doing so and so, then you will end up with being a millionaire. That's not the case. But a situation from my daily real life is that we have been dealing with scanning probe microscope for nearly 25 years. And 1 month ago, we signed a contract with a small German company called Carl Zeiss, and where we integrate the SPM technology into the electron microscope and other charged particle microscope in order to increase the power of this sort of microscopes. And I talked with this management there when we negotiate the detail of the contract, that we are the mouse and they are the elephant, and they respect that point of view, but they told us that they need the mouse. And it says all in one that the world is not linear. And you will in a few, within 1 month, you will see some of the first products in this combination are getting on market. That's just a comment, but it's still also an example of a non-linear process.
If I may comment very briefly on this. Of course, the line from a discovery to an invention is not a straight line. It normally runs wild and you get nothing out of it. I think in order to be successful, you have to allow for your intuition to work, and you have to, if you have a signal, just a very small signal from one of your experiments, for example, you must have the courage to follow it. Again, if you believe in straight lines, you are lost. It is serendipity is of importance, and also intuition and courage. My diffuse comment to your comment.
Should we? You seem very eager, so eagerness should, of course, prevail.
I think that you are stepwise coming from a scientific idea to a product, which you have described, may be particularly valid in the chemical and pharmaceutical industry, where there is a common understanding of both the basic and the applied research between the different parts in the group. Now, when it comes to other fields of technical scientific science, it may be quite different. Let us take an example. At a university institute, a new principle has been developed which might lead to an instrument, to a machine, or to maybe a consumer product. Now, the range of industries in this country which could convert this basic idea to a product is limited. And you will mostly find that if this is a completely new scientific principle that has been developed at the university level, you will not be able to sell this as such to a more industrialized, to an industry, or maybe not even to applied research institution as the GTS institutions. We'll have to develop that further. And my experience from 20 years as a GTS institute leader says that in order to make a product available for commercial production, you may have to go as far as to produce at least a prototype of the instrument to prove that this principle can function and has, first of all, a production, and secondly, a commercial value, which is far beyond the limit level between, in your case, you mentioned that research should only be done at, the basic research be done at the university level, and all development on more industrialized stages. In many cases of scientific work, you will have to go much further with development at the first step in order to get it be done. Thank you.
Well, even though this talk was not in the program, I think it was very welcome. It might have been put in the program, but anyway.
Let me say, well, I understand your comment, but still, and you have experience with the GTS Institute, but I still, in this process, from the discovery to the invention, the GTS Institute will, after all, be very useful. And my own experience, I admit this is the pharmaceutical biomedicine area. This institute, GTS, has been tremendously important, and it will be of growing importance. The problem with the GTS Institute is that they are locked in a severe bureaucratic system which is limiting their activities. And I hope we will hear more about this later today, where we'll hear more specific about the GTS Institute. But I think the GTS Institute forming these triangle structures could in many cases be very helpful.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.